Alright, let me tell you about this one time when I was living alone in this small studio apartment. It wasn't anything fancy, just a basic place in a quiet neighborhood. I had just moved out on my own for the first time, and I was still getting used to the whole living alone thing. You know how it is. Exciting, but also a little nerve-wracking. I was trying to be all independent, but there were definitely moments when I missed having roommates around. So, it was a Saturday night, and I decided to have a low-key evening in. I wasn't really in the mood to go out, so I thought I'd just chill, order some takeout, and watch a movie. I remember I was really looking forward to some downtime. The week had been stressful, and I just wanted to unwind without any interruptions. I ordered some Chinese food from this place down the street and put on a movie. It was one of those quiet nights, you know? Like, almost too quiet. I remember thinking that the silence was kind of nice at first, but then it started feeling a little eerie. It's funny how when you're alone, the quiet can go from peaceful to unsettling real quick. Anyway, I was about halfway through my movie when I started hearing this noise. It was really faint at first, like a soft tapping sound. I thought it was maybe just the neighbors or something outside, so I ignored it. But then it kept going, this steady, rhythmic tapping. It sounded like it was coming from the window in the living area. I paused the movie and listened. The tapping was still there, this constant, annoying sound. I started to feel uneasy, like someone was messing with me. I got up and walked over to the window, half expecting to see a tree branch hitting the glass or something. But there was nothing there. No tree, no wind, just the empty street below. The tapping stopped as soon as I got close, which freaked me out even more. I stood there for a minute, just staring out the window, trying to figure out where the noise had come from. The street was deserted, not a single car or person in sight. I shrugged it off, telling myself it was probably just some weird house noise or maybe even my imagination. I went back to the couch and tried to get back into the movie, but it was hard to concentrate. About 20 minutes later, I heard it again. This time, it was coming from the kitchen. It was that same tapping sound, slow and deliberate, like someone was tapping their nails on the counter. I muted the TV and listened, my heart starting to race. The tapping was steady, and it was definitely coming from the kitchen. I got up, trying to stay calm, and walked to the kitchen. The sound stopped as soon as I walked in. I turned on the light and looked around. Everything was in its place. The dishes were still in the sink, the window was closed, and the door was locked. I checked the cabinets, the pantry, even the fridge, but there was nothing out of the ordinary. I went back to the living room, feeling this growing sense of unease. I sat on the couch, listening, waiting for the tapping to start again, but it didn't. Everything was quiet, too quiet. I tried to focus on the movie, but my mind kept wandering back to that noise. What the hell was it? I couldn't figure it out, and it was driving me crazy. I decided to call it a night. I turned off the TV, cleaned up a bit, and got ready for bed. I double-checked the locks on the door and windows, just to be sure, and then crawled into bed. I lay there in the dark, listening to the sounds of the apartment. Every little creak and groan made my skin crawl. I kept telling myself it was nothing, just the building settling or something, but I couldn't shake this feeling that something was off. I must have fallen asleep at some point because I woke up to this weird sound. It was around 3 a.m., and there was this soft rustling noise coming from the living room. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest, and listened. The rustling turned into a low, creaking sound, like the floorboards were shifting under someone's weight. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight, pointing it toward the bedroom door. I didn't dare get up. I just sat there, staring at the door, listening. The creaking continued for a few seconds, and then everything went silent again. I couldn't take it anymore. I had to know what was going on. I got up, my hands shaking, and slowly opened the bedroom door. I shone the flashlight into the living room, half expecting to see someone standing there, but it was empty. I stepped into the room, my heart pounding in my chest. I checked every corner, behind the couch, even under the table, but there was nothing. I stood there in the middle of the room, trying to catch my breath. My mind was racing. Had someone been in here? Was someone watching me? I couldn't explain what I'd heard, and it was freaking me out. I went back to my room, locked the door, and sat on the bed, trying to calm down. The rest of the night, I didn't sleep much. I kept hearing little noises, every creak and groan making me jump. It was like the apartment was alive, and I was just waiting for something to happen, but nothing did. The morning came, and I was exhausted, but I was also relieved that the night was over. The next day, I tried to act normal, like everything was fine. I went out, ran some errands, and tried not to think about what had happened. I even told myself that I had probably just imagined it all, that maybe I was just on edge because I was alone. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. That evening, I got back to the apartment, and as soon as I walked in, I felt that same weird vibe again. It was like the air was heavier, like something was off. I went through my usual routine, trying to act like nothing was wrong, but I was on edge the entire time. Around 10 p.m., I started hearing the tapping again. This time, it was coming from the wall behind the TV. I muted the show I was watching and listened. The tapping was steady, like before, but it sounded closer, like it was just on the other side of the wall. I got up, my heart pounding, and walked over to the wall. I pressed my ear against it, trying to figure out what was making the noise. The tapping stopped immediately, and all I could hear was the faint hum of the building. I pulled back, feeling this cold, creeping fear wash over me. I went back to the couch, trying to calm myself down. I didn't know what to do. Was I just losing it? Was there actually something going on? I sat there for a while, listening, waiting for the tapping to start again, but it didn't. Everything was dead silent. I couldn't take it anymore. I decided to spend the night at a friend's place. I grabbed my bag, threw in some clothes, and left the apartment. I didn't even bother to lock the door behind me. I just needed to get out of there. I stayed with my friend that night, and I felt a lot better being away from that apartment. I told them about what had been happening, and they tried to reassure me that it was probably nothing, just the building making noises, or maybe my mind playing tricks on me. But I knew what I had heard, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The next day, I went back to the apartment with my friend. Everything was just how I had left it. No sign of anything weird or out of place. I felt a bit silly, like maybe I had overreacted. But even now, when I'm alone in that apartment, I can't shake the feeling that something's not right. I still hear noises sometimes, little taps and creaks that make my skin crawl. I don't know what it is, but I know one thing for sure. I'm never completely comfortable there. And every time I hear a noise, I get that same cold, creeping feeling, like I'm not really alone. You know those nights when you're home alone and everything just feels off? That's exactly what happened to me a couple of years ago. It was a Friday night and my parents had gone out of town for the weekend. They were visiting some friends a few hours away, and my little brother was at a sleepover. So it was just me, the house, and my plans to binge watch some shows and maybe play some video games until I crashed. I was looking forward to it. A quiet night to myself, no interruptions. I'd spent most of the evening just relaxing. I ordered some Chinese takeout around 7 p.m., the usual, orange chicken, fried rice, and some egg rolls. The delivery guy showed up at the door, and I remember tipping him a little extra since it was a cold night. After grabbing my food, I locked the door behind me, checked the windows to make sure they were shut tight, and settled in the living room. I had my food, a stack of blankets, and a horror movie marathon queued up. Perfect, right? Everything was going smoothly for the first couple of hours. I was halfway through my second movie when I thought I heard something upstairs. It was faint, almost like a creaking sound. I paused the movie, straining to listen, but after a few seconds, it was quiet again. I brushed it off as the house settling. You know how old houses are. They make weird noises all the time, especially at night. I went back to my movie, but a little part of me was on edge. It's funny how when you're alone, you start noticing every little sound. The hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the clock on the wall, everything seems louder, more noticeable. I tried to focus on the movie, but I couldn't shake this feeling of unease, like something wasn't quite right. About 20 minutes later, I heard it again. This time, it was louder, like a thud coming from upstairs. I paused the movie again, my heart starting to race a bit. It sounded like something falling to the floor, maybe in one of the bedrooms. I sat there for a moment, trying to convince myself it was nothing, but curiosity got the better of me. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight, feeling a little silly for being so paranoid. I mean, it was probably just something I'd left on the edge of a counter or a shelf that had finally fallen off, but I had to check, just to ease my mind. I got up from the couch and headed to the stairs, trying to move as quietly as possible. The house was dark, except for the light coming from the TV screen behind me. As I reached the bottom of the stairs, I hesitated. The second floor was pitch black, and I couldn't see anything from where I was standing. I shined the flashlight up the stairs, but it didn't do much to cut through the darkness. I took a deep breath and started climbing the stairs, each step creaking under my weight. When I got to the top, I stood there for a second, listening. The hallway was empty, and all the bedroom doors were closed. I walked down the hall, checking each room one by one. My parents' room was first. I opened the door slowly, peeking inside. Everything was in its place. The bed neatly made, the nightstands untouched. I checked the windows to make sure they were locked, and they were. Next was my little brother's room. I opened the door and quickly shone the flashlight around. His room was a mess, as usual. Clothes and toys scattered everywhere, but nothing seemed out of place. I closed the door and moved on to the bathroom. But again, nothing. Just silence. Finally, I got to my own room at the end of the hall. I opened the door and stepped inside, my heart pounding in my chest. I shone the flashlight around, but everything looked normal. My bed was still unmade from this morning. My desk was cluttered with papers and books, but nothing seemed off. I stood there for a moment, feeling a little stupid for getting so worked up. Maybe it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. I turned around to head back downstairs, but then I heard it again. A soft, almost inaudible creaking sound coming from the hallway. I froze, my heart racing. I knew for sure that I hadn't made that sound. I slowly turned around, shining the flashlight into the hallway. It was empty, just as I'd left it, but the sound was real. I'd heard it with my own ears. It was like someone stepping on the creaky floorboard near the stairs. I took a few steps forward, my phone light barely illuminating the dark hall. I was about to take another step when I heard another sound, this time coming from downstairs. A soft, metallic clink, like something hitting the floor in the kitchen. My mind was racing. Was someone in the house with me? Had I somehow missed them during my check? I felt a surge of panic, but I tried to stay calm. I slowly backed into my room and closed the door as quietly as possible. I didn't know what else to do, so I locked the door and went to the window. My first thought was to call the police, but then I realized I didn't even know if there was really anyone there. What if it was just my imagination again? I peered out the window, trying to see if there was anyone outside, but the street was empty. No cars, no people, just the quiet suburban neighborhood. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. I felt like a prisoner in my own house, too scared to make a move. I decided to call my friend Mike. He lived just a few blocks away, and I figured he could come over and help me check the house. I dialed his number and waited for what felt like an eternity before he picked up. I quickly explained what was happening, trying to keep my voice steady. He told me to stay put and that he'd be over in 5 minutes. Those 5 minutes felt like hours. I sat on the edge of my bed, clutching my phone, listening for any more sounds from downstairs. Everything was silent again, but the silence was almost worse. It was like the calm before the storm, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something bad was about to happen. Finally, I heard a knock on the front door. I jumped, my heart leaping into my throat. I got up and went to the window, looking down to see Mike standing on the porch. Relief washed over me, and I quickly made my way downstairs to let him in. When I opened the door, he gave me a look like I was crazy, but I didn't care. I was just glad he was there. We went through the house together, checking every room, every closet, every corner, but there was nothing. No signs of anyone having been inside, no open windows, no unlocked doors. It was like the house was messing with me. We went to the kitchen last, and that's when we found it. The source of the metallic clink I'd heard earlier. One of the knives from the knife block was on the floor, lying a few feet away from the counter. My blood ran cold when I saw it. I knew I hadn't used that knife, and there was no way it could have just fallen out on its own. Those knives fit snugly in the block, and it would take a lot of force to knock one out. Mike picked it up, turning it over in his hands, and gave me a concerned look. I could tell he was starting to believe me, that maybe there really was something weird going on. We put the knife back in the block and checked the rest of the kitchen, but again, nothing seemed out of place. After we finished checking the house, Mike stayed with me for a while. We sat in the living room, talking about what had happened, trying to make sense of it. He suggested it could have been an animal or something, maybe a raccoon that somehow got inside. But deep down, I knew that wasn't it. I'd heard footsteps. I'd heard that door creak, and I knew the knife didn't just fall out of the block on its own. Mike left after a couple of hours, and I decided to just stay in the living room for the rest of the night. I didn't go back upstairs. I didn't want to. I locked all the doors, checked the windows again, and tried to distract myself with more TV. But every little noise made me jump, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. The rest of the night was a blur. I don't think I slept at all. I just sat on the couch staring at the TV, waiting for morning to come. When the sun finally started to rise, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. Somehow, daylight made everything feel a little less scary. When my parents got back the next day, I told them what happened. They were skeptical, of course, thinking maybe I'd just gotten spooked being home alone. But they checked the house again, just to be safe. They didn't find anything, no signs of forced entry or anything out of place. To this day, I don't know what really happened that night. Maybe it was just my imagination. Maybe I was just being paranoid. But every time I hear a creak or a thud in the house, I think back to that night, and I can't help but wonder if someone really was there with me, hiding in the shadows. I remember this one night like it was yesterday. I was living alone in this small, one-bedroom apartment downtown. It wasn't anything fancy, just a cozy little place on the second floor of an old building. The kind of place where you hear everything that happens in the hallway or the street outside. You get used to the creaks and groans of the building after a while, but they still get to you sometimes, especially when you're alone. That Friday, I was supposed to go out with some friends, but plans fell through last minute, so I figured I'd make the best of it and have a quiet night at home. I ordered some takeout, set up a little movie marathon, and just relaxed. It was one of those rare nights where I didn't have to worry about anything or be anywhere. I remember I was halfway through this old horror movie when I heard a noise. At first I thought it was just part of the movie, but then I realized it was coming from outside my door. It sounded like a soft thud, like something falling over. I paused the movie and just sat there for a second, listening. Nothing else. I shrugged it off as maybe a neighbor dropping something in the hallway. A few minutes later, I heard it again. This time, it was more like a shuffle, like someone was dragging their feet right outside my door. My apartment was at the end of the hallway, so it wasn't like there were people passing by all the time. It was strange. I muted the TV and just listened, straining to hear anything else. The shuffling sound stopped, and then there was this eerie silence. I got up and went to the door, peeking through the peephole. The hallway light was on, but I didn't see anyone. It was just empty, as it should be. I stood there for a minute, feeling uneasy. Maybe it was someone looking for the wrong apartment, I thought. I tried to brush it off and went back to the couch. I hit play on the movie again, but I couldn't focus. I kept glancing at the door, waiting to hear another sound. About 10 minutes later, I heard it again. This time, it was like a light tapping, almost like someone was lightly knocking on the door. But it wasn't a normal knock. It was inconsistent, like someone was just randomly tapping their fingers against the wood. I got up again, my heart starting to race a little. I looked through the peephole, but there was still no one there. The tapping stopped as soon as I looked. I started to feel that creeping sensation, like maybe I wasn't alone. I put my ear to the door, trying to listen, but it was just silent now. I sat back down, trying to shake off the weird feeling. I was probably just being paranoid, right? It's an old building. Maybe the noises were coming from the pipes or something. I tried to convince myself it was nothing, but deep down, I knew something was off. About an hour later, I was still sitting there, feeling on edge. I had turned off the movie at this point and was just scrolling through my phone, trying to distract myself. That's when I heard a new noise, a faint creaking sound coming from the bedroom. I froze, my blood running cold. The bedroom door was closed, and I was sure I hadn't heard anything like that before. I slowly got up, my heart pounding in my chest. I walked toward the bedroom, each step feeling heavier than the last. When I got to the door, I stood there for a second, just staring at it. I didn't want to open it. I had this irrational fear that something was waiting on the other side, but I had to know. I reached for the doorknob, my hand shaking, and slowly turned it. I pushed the door open, peeking inside. The room was dark, but the light from the hallway cast enough of a glow for me to see. There was nothing there. The window was closed. The bed was undisturbed. Everything was just as I had left it. I stood there for a moment, my heart still racing. Then I heard it again. The same creaking noise. But this time, it was coming from inside the room, near the closet. I turned on the light, my eyes darting to the closet door. It was slightly ajar, which was weird because I always kept it closed. I walked over, every nerve in my body screaming at me to just run, but I had to know. I yanked the closet door open, half expecting to see someone or something inside, but it was empty, just my clothes hanging there, swaying slightly like they had been disturbed. I felt a chill run down my spine. I checked the closet, moving the clothes aside, looking for anything that could have made that noise. Nothing, just empty space and shadows. I closed the closet door, feeling more unsettled than ever. I went back to the living room, trying to make sense of what was happening. I grabbed my phone and called a friend, not really knowing what to say, just wanting to hear another person's voice. They tried to reassure me, saying it was probably just my imagination or maybe the building settling. I wanted to believe them, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. After hanging up, I decided to turn on every light in the apartment. I know it sounds silly, but I felt like maybe if the place was lit up, I wouldn't feel so scared. I went around, turning on the lights in the kitchen, the bathroom, every room. It helped a little, but not much. I sat back down on the couch, the room now bright as day, but I still felt on edge. I tried to go back to watching TV, but I couldn't focus. My eyes kept darting to the hallway, waiting to see something or someone appear. It was the most unsettling feeling, like being watched but not being able to see who was watching you. Then, just as I was starting to calm down, I heard another noise. This time, it was coming from the front door. It was the sound of the doorknob rattling, like someone was trying to turn it but couldn't because it was locked. My heart leapt into my throat. I jumped up and ran to the door, looking through the peephole. Again, there was no one there. The hallway was empty, but I could still hear the faint rattle of the doorknob. I watched, waiting for something to happen, but nothing did. The rattling stopped, and everything went silent again. I backed away from the door, feeling like I was losing my mind. I checked the lock, making sure it was secure, and then double-checked all the windows to make sure they were locked too. I felt like a prisoner in my own apartment, trapped and scared. I didn't sleep that night. I stayed up, sitting on the couch with all the lights on, just listening. Every little noise made me jump, and I kept looking at the door, waiting for something to happen, but nothing did. The rest of the night was quiet, but that didn't make me feel any better. The next morning, I was exhausted, but I still had this uneasy feeling. I got ready and left the apartment as soon as I could. I spent the whole day out just wandering around the city, trying not to think about what had happened, but I knew I couldn't avoid it forever. I had to go back eventually. When I got back that evening, I was still on edge, but I forced myself to go in. The apartment felt different, like it wasn't really mine anymore, like something had changed, and not in a good way. I checked all the rooms again, making sure everything was still locked and secure. I tried to go about my evening like normal, but I couldn't relax. Every little noise made me jump, and I kept glancing at the door, expecting it to start rattling again. I finally decided to go to bed early, thinking maybe I could just sleep through whatever was happening. I lay there in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the silence. For a while, everything was quiet, and I started to think maybe it was over. Maybe I had just imagined it all, let my mind play tricks on me. But then, just as I was starting to drift off, I heard it again. It was the same tapping noise from the night before, but this time it was right outside my bedroom door. My heart stopped. I turned on the light, sitting up in bed, listening. The tapping grew louder, more insistent, like someone was knocking on the door, but in a weird, erratic pattern. I stared at the door, my mind racing. I didn't know what to do. I wanted to get up and open it, but I was too scared. I didn't want to know what was on the other side. I just sat there, frozen, listening to the tapping. It went on for what felt like hours, but was probably only a few minutes. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, It stopped. I waited, my heart pounding in my chest, but the apartment was silent again. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I just sat there, with the light on, staring at the door. I kept expecting the tapping to start again, or for the doorknob to turn, but nothing happened. The rest of the night was eerily quiet, almost too quiet. The next morning I got out of there as soon as the sun came up. I went to a friend's place and told them everything. They tried to reassure me, saying it was probably just my imagination, or maybe the building making noises, but I knew it wasn't that simple. There was something in that apartment, something I couldn't see but could definitely feel. I stayed at my friend's place for a few days, too scared to go back. When I finally did, it was only to pack up my things and move out. I couldn't stay there any longer. I didn't care if it was just my mind playing tricks on me. I wasn't taking any chances. To this day, I don't know what was happening in that apartment. Maybe it was nothing, just my imagination getting the best of me. Or maybe there was something there, something that didn't want me to be alone. All I know is I've never been more scared in my life, and I hope I never have to feel that way again.